start by getting a rough feel for where technically you all are. Is this too loud or is this good? Yeah. So could I get a show of hands? Who has used ChatGPT, OpenAI in any way at all? So like basically everyone, cool. And now who here has used the API to build anything? Okay, some people. Now who's used a vector database like Pinecone or anything else combined with OpenAI? I think no one. Right. And then anyone use LangChain at all? Okay, a couple of people with LangChain. Anyone know what LangChain is and has read about it at all? No. Cool. Okay, that's really great. So what I'll do is we'll start by showing you what we said. Find out if AI is coming for your job and to see AI controlling views. So this is a little module that we've built. We put in this prompt. And there you go. This is AI there, slowly coming for your job, writing some YAML itself. Now, actually, if we go to my next slide, we'll get that running in the background. It takes a little bit of time. If you go to the next slide. The answer, I think, is it's not yet. You're going to see me import it. It's a really simple view. There's a whole bunch of reasons why you're going to still need developers. In fact, what I think we've found when we've looked at this question of is AI coming for your job, is there's a couple of really specific areas where you as a developer can provide a great deal of value to your clients and projects that you're working on that someone who isn't a developer without programming skills probably can't. There's a great deal of value that you can get out of AI by just going to chat.openai.com and just talking to it. But this talk isn't going to focus on that stuff. It's going to focus on the things that you can do as a developer to do things that somebody else wouldn't be able to do. And there's these two main areas, which I'll talk about in more detail, called in-context learning and chaining prompts. That are things that do require developers to some degree and can significantly improve the results that you're going to get from ChatGPT. And then I'm going to show off two modules. One of them is on Drupal.org, and one of them is more of a prototype module to demonstrate these concepts. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about where we're going to go. Cool. So firstly, a bit about me. My name's Jamie Abrahams. I'm Yautja Satanu on Drupal.org. I'm a co-founder of Freely Give. Started in DrupalCon Croydon or London in 2011. Our company is focused on native Drupal CRM, and so a lot of the sites that we work on, whereas many Drupal sites have millions of users on it for a few minutes, our goal is to, most of our sites have maybe 100 users using it, but 8 hours a day. We're kind of building business applications a lot of the time. And it is through that I've become totally obsessed with AI. I think a lot of people have said that when they first got into it, they had a couple of sleepless nights. It was a bit terrifying. Then you go into more detail and find that, for me, it's not so much that things were less scary, but more there are things that we can do. Right. So the main limitation with OpenAI, with ChatGPT, and with LLMs in general, I would bring down to this thing called the context window. You will have heard prompt engineering, perhaps. Does anyone know the term prompt engineering and know what it is? Could I get a show of hands? Yeah, so a few of you know that. So prompt engineering is getting better at understanding how you do your prompts. And there are some quite technical ways that you can significantly improve your prompt. This talk's not going to be about the prompt engineering, although that's very important, and that's important for everyone. But the prompt is stuff that you can fit in the context window. What I'm interested in is breaking that. And the reason why is, let's say I want to get ChatGPT to write me a Drupal module. Now, it's been fine-tuned when it was originally trained on pretty much everything on GitHub, I think, and GitLab. So it will know a lot of how Drupal works, but it doesn't know about Drupal 10. It won't know about Drupal 11. So it doesn't know a lot of things. It doesn't know things about my own site as well. Now, if you try and put that into the prompt, you're going to be limited. The current models with ChatGPT are between 4K and 32K tokens. And 32K tokens is quite difficult to get access to. And that's the limit of what you can say in your prompt and your response. Roughly speaking, a token is about 0.75 words, and you can see on the right is an example of a lorem ipsum sum split up into tokens. Now, that's going to cause problems because if you want to write a module or you want to start writing reports or do anything interesting, it doesn't know a lot of your data structure other than what you can tell it in the context window. And a lot of the time, the amount of data it needs to know in order to do something useful is much bigger than can fit into 4K tokens. And also, this token limit is the limit of the prompt and response. So the more information you feed into it, the less information you can get back out of it, which again is a problem if you want to do anything interesting with data and analytics, etc. Some people have suggested fine-tuning in open source, so taking your own module and just training it with all of your data so it knows, quote unquote, knows everything. The word on the street I get from the people I know who've been trying to build things is that fine-tuning and fine-tuning particularly is not really a viable option right now. It's very expensive, very complicated to do, and rarely produces better results than what you can get with good prompt engineering and the things that we have here. So this breaking the context window and finding clearer and better ways of telling ChatGPT what it needs to know in order to achieve its task, I think is the primary goal of what we as developers can do to push things further than what a non-developer will be able to do with the website directly. So yeah, can you go next? So the first one I want to look at is this module we produced called Search API AI. And what this does is essentially allows you to index all the content on your site, including attachments. And so you can put in a huge resource library. You can put in huge amounts of PDFs, loads of legal documents, however many pages you want. And then you can get Search API to index it. And it indexes it into this software called Pinecone. And I'm going to go into more detail about exactly how this works. And this provides a massive knowledge base that ChatGPT knows about. And so now I can have a conversation with ChatGPT, but instead of it talking, but using the knowledge it has in its own training, it's got the stuff that I provided on my website. And let's demo this. So what we've built here is a very simple set of products and a bunch of T-shirts. And we're going to ask it a question. Right. And you can see here now it's given an answer, and it's given links to the products. So the question here is, please provide ethical products and tell me why they're ethical. Now, if you can scroll down and see the description of these products, something that is unique compared to what you would do with traditional search is one of them has been described as we pay our workers a fair wage. The other has been described as is made in a factory with cheap labor, and the other simply says the word, it's ethically made. Now, traditional search would easily find that product that is ethical. But because ChatGPT is trained and understands the semantic meaning of the question it is asked and also understands the meaning of the products that we've loaded into it, it knows that usually paying workers a fair wage is ethical. And in this case, it can also give a description of why it believes those things are ethical. And there's no limit to what you can load in this. This is a solution potentially to completely break the context window, provided for all the information. In reality, there's some limitations, which I'm going to talk about soon. And then can we go to the next one? So this is products on your site. We have built some stuff where you can then filter this. So this is a view. You can filter it by favorites, ask it the same question, and now you've limited the knowledge base it has to just those things that you want. And you can take this further by clicking on a specific node and have a conversation about the content in that. Now, with products, that's probably not so useful. But if you go to the resource library at the top, here is a bunch of planning documents. They are from a planning committee for local councillors, and they've uploaded those information. So let's say I want to know more about how parking is going to improve in this area. And so now what it's been able to do is look through all of those documents describing the planning committees and tell you a bit about which things are involved in parking and where. And it doesn't do it here, but a lot of the time it will provide you a link, as you saw before, to the actual content. Let me show you, then the next thing I'm going to do is a quick overview of how we get this set up. So it's Search API AI, so you can download it off Drupal.org. It is working perfectly with Search API, so you create a Pinecone server. Now we can go to the index and show you the different fields. So when we're creating an index, go into fields. There's a new type of field here called embedding, and this works the magic to make it so that AI can understand it. And then there's the block. You show the configuration of the block. And here you can select which index this chatbot wants to talk to, which view, which allows to control it. The entity types also allows you to limit to a specific entity, so then this chatbot will talk to only the entity that you're looking at if it detects something in the root. And if you scroll down in chat configuration, this is where you can control the prompts that are sent around it. And when I say you're going to need developers, this is one area where developers will help your users, is that we can do the prompt engineering here, so they can type whatever they like, but there's some hard-coded, settings that we've created around the user prompt that you can see down here, where we can limit it to those things. Right, so the next slide. Or keep going with all these, yeah, there we go. Okay, so this thing here. So this is a diagram of what's going behind the scenes. What I found really exciting when I got excited with AI is that everyone was researching how to do interesting things with AI in different ways. And gradually, everyone was converging on roughly similar design patterns. And so what I'm showing you here is something that you see all over the place. There's a lot of these tools that are being used to, quote unquote, train ChatGPT on your entire knowledge base that use something similar to this. It's quite likely that something similar to this is going to come into Windows 11 itself with Copilot. And then there's loads of open source tools that do this. What's unique about the Search API AI module is that it does it in a Drupal way. It works with Search API. And so when it was dealing with PDFs, we used the Search API attachments module, and everything just worked. But this is a description of it. So you've got your knowledge base at number 1, and this is a whole bunch of PDFs, bunch of content, a bunch of products. And the first thing that we do, because as I said, ChatGPT is limited by a very small amount of text you can put into it. So instead of having a 300-page document, we chunk it into smaller chunks that by default are 1,536 characters. So those are chunked. And then we embed those things. And we use the OpenAI embedding tool. Now, this is the academic definition, a way of what embedding is, a way of representing data as points in n-dimensional space, so that similar data points cluster together. And to anyone who knows about machine learning, that's completely normal. That makes a load of sense, and they're happy with it. Embedding has happened long before ChatGPT. My definition is it's a way of capturing and scoring what something means. And I think for anyone who's into machine learning, they'll probably cringe at that definition. But for most normal people who are going to be using this method, that's basically correct. So it's a whole series of scores on, let's say, for example, ethicalness. And it will score on a scale of, I don't know, 0 to 1, how ethical this piece of, how much the chunk of text talks about ethicalness stuff. And then it stores it in a vector store at number 4 into Pinecone. Then when somebody comes along and asks a question, so for example, what is Drupal? We then use the same model to embed that question, so score it in a similar way. And then we can use semantic vector search to compare what things roughly mean something similar to the question that we've asked. We rank it in order, and we send the top. By default, it's 4, although if you've got larger context windows, you can go up to 8. You send the top 4 or 8 snippets of text, putting into your prompt. And then your prompt will look something like, the user has asked this question. Here's the context that I want you to look at. Answer the question based around this. And what you find with this method is magically, a lot of the times, it does really look like it's learned and understood the whole document you've read. It's read through the whole textbook and given you an answer. In reality, it only knows what we've sent it. So if we go to the next one. So this means it is fantastic at finding really specific pieces of information based around the semantic understanding of what the question asked and writing it in a way that the person can understand. And it's great at summarizing and presenting that information. So you've got a huge amount of context. It can summarize it down into something that somebody can understand easily. And as I said, it understands the meaning of the words, not just a word search. But the limitation and this is something a little bit complicated, so I haven't figured out how to word it exactly. It only knows what's put into the context. It doesn't actually know anything else. And so there are some questions that it's not very good at answering. So if, for example, you've got a complicated philosophical piece of text, and you want to know what's the argument it has for doing something one way or the other, it's very good at telling you what the argument is that the text is presented. But if you go, does this thing present a good argument for X? It's not very good at telling you, no, the whole document never covers that, because it only is limited to what we've sent in its context. I think there are ways around this, but this is something that's important to understand. So this is step 1, in-context learning. It's called in-context learning because in the context that we provide it, in the prompt that we provide it, that's where we include all its learning, rather than by trying to do something like fine-tune it. Does anyone have any questions about this before I move on to the next slide, stuff to do with chaining? No? Cool. Right, so here I'm going to talk a bit about the commercial applications for this. I think this will be really powerful for searching based around the semantic understanding. That's going to be something that's going to be quite cool. It's going to be quite useful for, there's going to be data privacy issues that you're going to have to look at with all of these things. But if users are asking questions a lot of the time and you are happy storing those questions, it's going to be quite helpful to help business users understand the specifics of what people are looking for, what kind of products they want, why they like those products. You get a little bit about that by looking at the analytics of the keywords that they use, but much more when you can see the verbose questions that they're actually asking. I think FAQs and contact us pages will be really fantastic for this. So having it, you could imagine a tool where on the contact us page, when they're asking you a question for your organization, having something where somebody types in their question, they click a button, an AI bot gives what it thinks is an answer trained on its FAQ first, and if the person's not happy, then it sends the email. A lot of organizations I speak to find that getting people to use FAQs is very difficult, and this is quite a cool way of training it. And then really good at giving people intelligent, important information about a larger document before they actually read it. So if you do have a huge amount of documents, marketing reports, something like that, they can read the summary that you've written, but also they might be able to ask questions about that document before they commit to reading it and downloading it to figure out, like, does it answer my particular case or something? And sell advanced access to documents, I think, is going to be quite a big deal. Yeah. Okay, so the second way of which you can break the context window is chain multiple prompts and multiple actions together. So rather than just ask it a question once and get an answer, you ask it a series of questions and feed in the answers from one question to the other. So LangChain, as I mentioned earlier, that most people haven't taken a look at, it's sort of the single place where a lot of cool ideas for developers and AI, they sort of come together and they've made this somewhat bloated framework of tools to do anything with AI in some way. It's really new. It's on something like version 0.02 or 0.2. So whether or not it's something you'd want to use in a production site, I don't know. And a lot of people are re-implementing things in LangChain into the rest of the world. And they are really big at pioneering the concept of chaining prompts together. So one of the things that we're interested in is re-implementing some features of LangChain, like the embedding that you've seen with Search API AI, and now this chaining thing, re-implementing it in a Drupal way, in something that makes use of Drupal's fields, entities, views, and all the other modules that it has. So so this is the UI for it. I'm going to give you an example of a chain soon, but just so you know the terminology, you can have a prompt template, and so that's something you can hard code of all the words around the prompt, and when the user types something, that goes into the template. And that's how you can finally control it to be able to make ChatGPT do specific tasks. Let's say it's doing, well, we had a talk earlier about comment analysis, and let's say you want to get ChatGPT to do the comment sentiment analysis and tell you on a scale of 0 to 1 how positive this comment is. You can put into the prompt template, when somebody asks a question, make sure you only answer with a score 0 to 1, explaining what you believe the sentiment analysis is. And that means the users can type whatever they like, but they're going to get a relatively consistent response depending on what you as a developer want it to be. A chain, I've talked before. The prompt we know about. Then there's a concept, sort of a plugin. So a service is sort of a thing that can receive some information and spit out more. And I'll give you an example of that in a bit. And a skill is something that it can actually do. And finally, we have agents, which are like chains that can act autonomously without you starting it in some way. So let's move on to, this is an example for a chain for building views. Because if I tried to export all the field information about my Drupal site, it will, as YAML, to train it, it's well beyond 8K tokens. So I've tried it for a really simple site, for an out-of-the-box Drupal site. As soon as you start adding any fields or start being any kind of real thing, you can't just tell it your structure. So what instead we do is we go, okay, the user types in a thing. I would like a report to show the title of an article, of articles and basic pages. So we go, here's the question that the users asked for. Then Drupal looks up a list of all the content types, or let's say entities on your website, sends it to ChatGPT and say, from this list, which ones are going to be likely useful for this prompt, and output it as a machine name. It then goes into the next thing. So Drupal comes along and gets a whole bunch of entities, machine names, and says, and then exports all the field information, including the database information about that field and its label, and says, okay, here's all the fields about those entities, ChatGPT. This is the user prompt that we're looking for. Which fields are likely to be relevant? And ChatGPT then replies with a whole bunch of fields and the machine name of those fields. So it's cut down. So the final prompt can say, okay, ChatGPT, answer this question that the users asked for, and here's all the field information that is relevant to our site. So I want to show you again the import views, but the debug mode. So if you put in the prompt, so you can see, temperature 4. You can see with the first query that we're about to send, if you scroll down, it has exploded and has said, this down here is the user prompt, but here's a list of all of the, we're limiting it currently to nodes, but all the nodes on our site. And it's going to say, which content types do you want it to relate to? And make sure that it only returns the machine names. So click request content types. So now it said product. Now, before I showed you one that was about importing articles. This time now it's products, and these products are something, articles are obviously out of the box Drupal. This is something that we've created. Very simple products. They're just nodes, but they now have price. They have custom fields. So now we click generate YAML, and it will start going. And you can see along the right-hand side, I've started building out the chain. So the first chain here is the one for asking a question. If you scroll down, the second chain is keep going, is the final query, where you can see there's quite a lot that we as a developer have had to put in. I've had to tell it examples of Drupal YAML. I've had to tell it, there was a problem with it making plugin names the same, and it kept having duplicate plugin names. So I've had to tell it not to do that. Keep scrolling up on that thing. I've made sure that it doesn't try and be helpful and tell me, yeah, sure, I'll give you that answer, but it limits it only to YAML. And that can go in the background. We can move on to the next slide. Although, could you keep it so we can see it moving, and when it's green, we'll try and import it. Okay, and move on to the next slide. Okay, that was an example of it working. Next slide again. Yeah, so there's a couple of ideas that we have to expand on this module. So you saw there were 2 steps, and originally I wanted 3. So what we're hoping to do is build out this module so that you can add arbitrary steps. And then we want to explode this concept of plugins or services. So at the moment, we had a token that we can put into the prompt that gives you a list of the machine names of your entities, another one for the fields. So that one is a service that has an input list of, which is a list of entities, and output, which gives you the fields. The hope is what we could do in the world of Drupal is build out a whole plugin library of things that could work with your AI chains. And then finally, we had an action which took that YAML and imported it. And it sort of hackily took away what we've done with content synchronization and done the same thing there. But you could imagine doing lots of other things with this. You could make it so that this action, depending on A or B, it will write something to a field on, let's say for content moderation. It will say this is a safe content or not. Maybe it will send an email out. Maybe it will write some other code. So we've got this idea of sort of gradually building out a way of saving these chains, similar to how Views has a whole bunch of views, and a way of using these plugins so that you can start building arbitrary chains and getting complex information and complex decisions for various different needs. Okay, it's worked now, so we can try importing it. One thing about it is, you need to click import at the bottom. Okay, it's gone. Okay, so you click import view, confirm and import. Click here to edit the view. Okay, and then scroll down, and you can see we've got a view, and it has the products. So there you go. Okay, let's go back to our slide. Right, it's the next slide. Okay, and here's a little video of an in-progress thing of it chaining. Just 30 seconds. So here we've got something where instead of just having the ones I've set up, you can just start adding a whole bunch of different chains with different roles. And then we could see it being something where you can pass in the little tokens to make it do things that are much, much more advanced than simply creating a view. Cool. Okay, and the next slide. Now, I just want to talk a bit about how this fits into the wider AI community. Is there any questions about what we've shown with that now? With the Views ChatGPT? No? Okay. So there's question there. Okay.
My question is, what happens if it goes wrong?
Yeah, so at the moment, there is, I've been trying this quite often, so getting loads of importer stuff. So our importer has a bunch of validation to make it so that we can check it doesn't go wrong.
Can you adapt then your prompt or something? Or
sorry, what's that?
Start from scratch. Can you adapt your steps then if it goes wrong, or do you have to start from scratch again?
So at the moment, you have to start from scratch again. What would be cool, and what we've seen with OpenAI's code interpreter, is to have this chain allow for loops. So to make it so that before we go to the next step, ChatGPT checks for something. So having it so that the chain could go, I'm going to try importing it myself, rather than a user having to click the button like we do now. It tried to do it, and then see what the errors are, and then take the error, and then try and correct itself. That would be the ultimate goal with a lot of these things, so that ChatGPT sort of validates itself. And we're moving much closer to this autonomous agents. What I'm finding is right this second, the autonomous agent stuff is really cool for demos, and you'll find this a lot with AI. A lot of the demos are amazing, and when you do it in real life, it doesn't quite work for some reason. And the same thing we're finding with AutoGPT and all of these autonomous things, that it checks its own stuff. They are really cool for interesting demos that you can show something like a simple website being created from scratch. But when you go into the real world and you look at how much information and what your tolerance for errors are, you find it doesn't quite work. So what I'm feeling is, the thing that's cool about the tool that we built here is it provides us as developers the ability to check that it's right or wrong. Us as developers to decide, maybe we should write a plugin that checks that the YAML's valid. Or maybe instead of using YAML to create views, we're going to make a new thing in Views that has a really simplistic API for creating views that ChatGPT talks to that's much less error-prone than YAML. So I feel like this is actually, the fact that ChatGPT is not perfect is a good thing for us and our jobs, because right now, really to do good things with AI, I think you actually do need clever developers to understand when something goes wrong, how do I fix it? Rather than just rely on ChatGPT to. But then that's the vision. What I've laid out is the vision of where it could go in the future. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, sure. So basically the audience is not the end user at all.
Sorry, what's that?
The audience for this module is never the end user.
Absolutely. So all the tools with the thing I built, all of the screens that you saw before where you saw the different prompts, that's the audience's developers. And the goal is for the developer to, the output of it is that they just have a single box which they type in and it just makes it. At the moment, the box that I saw, you clicked generate YAML, then import. The ultimate goal, if you're going to give this to an end user, would be they just typed in their prompt, click save, they immediately see the view or report built. That would be the goal if we're going to do it for an end user. The Search API AI module is much more end user focused, but even that requires a developer to do a lot, setting up the index, etc. So it gets closer to spitting something out. But I think a lot of these modules that I'm excited about aren't end user focused, they're developer focused, because they're things that we can then bill. They're things that we can then help support our clients in some way that require us.
Thank you.
Cool. Okay, so this diagram here, there's this blog post which I really strongly recommend you taking a look at, Emerging Architectures for LLM Architectures. As I said, the whole AI community, how much time have we got, by the way? Okay, the whole AI community started finding that there were certain design patterns emerging that everyone did similar stuff for. And this blog post has kind of captured that. They talked to a lot of AI startups or people who have actually built things with AI, looked at how they tended to do things, and then documented it into this fantastic diagram and a description of everything. And you can see in the middle there's something called orchestration, and that's like the central piece of software that sends messages or does things to the ChatGPT or LM, and then does something with that information. You can see at the top there's embedding model, which you've seen before, and then the vector database of Pinecone. That seems to be an important part. And I believe that a lot of these things could be re-implemented in Drupal. And there is a worry of like, why bother doing that when people are doing it in Python in the outside world? Why would you want to re-implement it in Drupal? And I think one of the reasons is because of Drupal's fantastic modular architecture. These are all disparate apps. Some of them are software as a service systems that necessarily won't talk very well with each other. But if we started building these things into Drupal, so for example, they've got logging, bunch of software as a service logging tools that can log your prompts and how well your users have looked at them. But if we build a logging tool into Drupal, it actually knows the content that it's working with. It understands it. It can then connect well with views. It can connect well with the dashboards that you've built, the user page. It works automatically with all the roles and permissions that you have on your Drupal site. So I think there's a lot of power in re-implementing some of these things into Drupal so it can take advantage of the whole ecosystem of Drupal. You can see in one bit there, it says APIs/plugins. And Wolfram Alpha is an example of a plugin that works with ChatGPT. Zapier is another thing. How many people here have used Zapier at all? Okay, a couple of people. And again, I think that's kind of powerful and cool, but obviously, a lot of the time, it's much nicer when the two Drupal modules are talking to each other rather than via something like Zapier. So I think there's a lot of power there that we could do in the Drupal community if this were to take off. So if we move on to the next slide. A question I keep getting asked is open source alternatives. Now that module, that blog post here discusses them and talks about them. I'm just going to put this slide up there. If you want the slides afterwards, you can link to all of those things. They exist. What I'm finding, again, the kind of word on the street, is the open source alternatives are not there yet. They are potentially exciting, but when you try and use them in real life scenarios, they just perform so much worse than ChatGPT that they don't actually solve the problem that you want to do. That is almost certainly going to change. Obviously, Llama 2, I found out about it on the way here. Still the early reviews I'm hearing of it is that it is inferior to ChatGPT 4. So my focus with the modules that we're working on at the moment is, can I build something that is useful for a client? And I have been speaking to clients, and at some point, one of the clients will say, yes, we'll work together and build something, and then I'll have a case study of it actually doing something useful. But I want to use the best tools for that first, and then once we know the general way in which you can get ChatGPT or LLMs to do something useful, then it will be good to then explore, okay, if we plug in the open source alternatives, will it work just as well? Because obviously, if we can use these alternatives, it's going to be a lot nicer when it comes to controlling your own data, privacy-related issues. Being able to fine-tune it a bit might become actually viable for certain use cases, etc. Okay, so native Drupal CRM, as I said, is what we do. Here is a dashboard. There's our project. That's what I usually have come and talked about. If you go to the next slide, here's something that we worked on. We worked on building a delay repay system. It was for, in this case, it was for Northern, and it was a tool that would allow a customer to put in how delayed their train was. It would calculate how delayed your train was, figure out how much money the person needs, has all the customer service tools, has fraud management tools, has account tools. All of this was built with Drupal. Now, this was something we built quite a while back, but this has been the inspiration for this next slide of things that we could do with it, because you could easily see how we could use this chaining tool to take very simple jobs and automate them. So one of the jobs we had to do was take a ticket and take what the passenger had told us their journey was, and see, is that ticket valid on that journey? When we looked into using AI to do this 5 years ago, it was terrible, just nothing useful, it's just all gibberish. But OCR is so much better than it used to be, and we did some preliminary experiments where we used OCR on a uploaded ticket. We gave them the outputted data from a Drupal site and said, ChatGPT, rank it on a scale of 0 to 1, and then give me the reasons why you think this is what it is. And it was pretty good at saying, this is a valid ticket, this isn't a ticket, this is a valid ticket, but it wouldn't work on this journey. So I think there's going to be a huge number of potential applications with things like first-level customer service roles, refund requests, moderation, categorization of content from external sources that now require humans to do like very relatively basic logic on a piece of text over and over and over again. AI might be helpful at that. And instead of YAML, which is very verbose, getting it to write SQL is something we have explored, and I think that could be really powerful. So rather than producing a view, when I'm asking it to make a report, it just writes the SQL, runs it, outputs an HTML table. Or even better, the whole world for data analysis tends to be Python and pandas. So having it so that it would write its own code for pandas, and then execute that code and produce graphs, etc., that it can see. I think could be really powerful. Again, Python is significantly less verbose than a lot of programming languages, and certainly less than all the YAML that we have to write for a view. And so we might even be able to get it to have some kind of conversation where you can have a kind of futuristic style tool where I've got a browser plugin so I can talk at my computer, I'm talking to the data, and just say, I want a graph that does this. No, that's not quite right, do it like this. And it would just write all that stuff in real time. I think that's something that is not that far away. It's like months away. It's not even years away. And I think all of this can be done with ChatGPT 4 as it is. It's us that have to build the tools around it. And I've seen, I'm not a programmer. I did some programming when I was 16, but I made my first Drupal module a couple of months ago where I made a newspaper module, just made a newspaper content type with number of pages, and ChatGPT helped me write the whole module. It was a pretty simple module. The code was pretty bad, but there might be scope for that. Especially combining chaining and knowledge bases together. I can imagine we wouldn't get, it's not going to be too far where we could have an image of a theme developed by something like Midjourney or some of the other AI tools, and then have it look at that thing and start writing the theme for it directly. Yeah, my next one. Okay, so my talk's coming to an end, just about where to find us. We're spending a lot of our time on Hash AI and Hash OpenAI on Drupal.org Slack. Yeah, I'm Jamie and Yauch Satanu. We're trying to do meetings once every Friday. I don't know if that will get less regular, but we'll see how it goes. But every Friday at 2 p.m. BST, we found that works for, so some Americans can join us. We're just sort of meeting up informally to chat about AI and just geek out about anything that we've found in the week or any kind of interesting things. There's an initiative set up by someone else called Mindaugas, and there's an issue about it where summaries of those meetings are going to get posted. And then those are the two modules. At some point, we're going to get that Views ChatGPT module posted onto Drupal. Once we've got that infinite chaining, and it's more of a generic tool that actually does something, and we're probably going to put it as a Drupal.org module as well. And is that it? Okay. So do we have any questions about that? Right at the back there's a question. Just whilst I wait for the question, can I get a show of hands? Does anyone have any ideas in their own head where they've looked at these things and think, with our clients, I reckon I could build something useful? Yeah, we've got a few people. Okay, that's really interesting. So yeah, if you're interested in it, feel free to talk to us about it if you want more help with it. Oh yeah, we're going to have a BOF about this stuff as well at 4:15. And also, I'm going to be around, so you can chat if you want to. Yeah, the question.
Great talk, thanks very much. I haven't used ChatGPT, but I'm keen to get involved. Am I right in thinking it runs in the cloud?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it runs in the cloud, and you gave a great example of how you can give it access to your documents, and it can then come back with some meaningful answers. There's a how do you handle security issues on that?
Yeah, so right now, what I would say is security issues is the big hot topic when it comes to using AI stuff. In all those modules, you need to get an API access from OpenAI, platform.openai.com. You need an API key from that. And then for our other stuff, you need one from Pinecone, because that's also software as a service and run in the cloud. That's how we talk to it. So as of March 2023, OpenAI have said they don't use anything that was sent to us for training its model. Because prior to March, people who were using ChatGPT to help it with its code was finding all of the code they were using in it was going into training its model, and it was being spit out randomly to everyone else. So if you trust OpenAI, there aren't any security issues because it's not using your code to train anything. If you use chat.openai.com, there's a setting where you can turn off whether or not it will use your prompts for training. But that requires you to trust OpenAI. OpenAI is so much better that for many applications, you might decide, I don't care about the security issues too much because it's well worth it, the benefits. If you do care about security issues, we're probably going to need something on premises. So in those OpenAI, previous open source LLMs, they went in not order of size. So the first one was Vicuna, and I'm pretty sure people have got that working on Raspberry Pis. It's quite small. It's quite easy to run, but then the flip side is not as powerful. Falcon 40B requires 128 gig of RAM to really work, so it requires a relatively beefy machine. And then Llama 2, I don't know enough about how you run that. So some people, Llama 2 have, they're partnering with Microsoft so that you can, instead of hosting it locally on Windows, which they put a lot of effort into supporting, you can also have it on Azure. Azure also hosts OpenAI. So instead of going via OpenAI's API, you can go via Microsoft's thing. And you might trust Microsoft more than you trust OpenAI. Now, if you don't trust Microsoft and you don't trust these people, then the open source ones are probably going to be the only ones for you. And I'm sure there's going to be cloud people hosting APIs to an open source model if you don't want to host it yourself. But really, until then, security will be the biggest hot topic, which we just don't know because it requires us to just trust OpenAI primarily. The models are so expensive and complicated to run that it's not going to be that easy to do the good ones on a machine that you run in your own office or rack. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Cool. Do we have any other questions? Is there any responses? I don't know, just whilst we're brainstorming, does anyone have any other ideas of things I haven't thought about of possible applications of this that might be interesting, or directions, or things that we can do with the module? Yeah.
Yeah, so in the presentation you talked about creating action plugins, which I assume are sort of like core actions. I've been using ECA quite a bit, and I think there's some potentially really interesting use cases of having these work with ECA so that you can conditionally do some, AI-based things. And I don't know if you guys have looked at making those modules work together, or at least playing around to see how well they work together already. But I think that could be really interesting.
ECA is a Drupal module, is that right?
Yeah, it's called Event Condition Action, but it allows you to sort of like visually build out, conditional workflows.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds perfect. So in my head, I was really into Drupal 7 when I did more of building things. So I keep thinking of rules in my head, and then we haven't seen rules for a while, but it looks like ECA would be the same thing. But when I thought about those actions, to me, rules was what I was like envisioning, some kind of like module that sits outside of AI that you can use for building these things, but then we can now plug in AI to actually do the controlling of those things, which I think would be really powerful, because then any rule or action that works with Drupal generally can now be controlled by AI in some way. So I'll take a look at ECA, so thanks for that as an option. Is there any other modules that you can think of that would be really nice working with AI? I'm reckoning simple news for sending out emails. ECA looks like a good one. I obviously got views. Has anyone got any other ideas? Yeah.
So what about layout builder or paragraphs integration? So like AI would build your marketing pages for people.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that could be really powerful. I've seen other people actually we've spoken to do sort of some proprietary ways of doing that. So I think what you'd want to do is do something like, let's say we got a marketing page out of Drupal where, okay, so firstly, we've already got the augmenter module. So when it comes to, you've got your page already created, the augmenter module is something that allows you to use ChatGPT to write specific bits of content. And that can help you make a marketing page because it can write, can fill out the fields. What would be interesting is something where there's like a collection of paragraphs that you've set up, and there's a description of those paragraphs and what they're useful for that ChatGPT can understand. And then we could imagine using this chaining thing to go, okay, I want to build a marketing page that does this. Here's my list of paragraphs or other tools I can use for building this marketing page. Which ones do you want? Here is a description of the layout that our theme has. Where should those things go? And you can imagine a chaining process where it gradually builds those things out, then filling out those fields. So I think it could be powerful at that. The reason why I'm less excited by that right now is because I think when you're doing a good marketing page, and I could be wrong, our company is not really big on the marketing side of things compared to building things, but I feel like the design is so key to a good marketing page that until it can generate images and use those images to implement a theme, the utility of it just simply writing the copy is still good, but is not as important, I think. But I could be wrong there.
Yes, so maybe it would be a better approach to start simple by not creating the whole marketing page, but to suggest changes to existing marketing pages.
Yeah.
And then you could also go A/B testing it. So basically you could have AI generated variants, and then you could have automatically A/B testing on it, and then even have AI decide on what would make sense to.
Yeah, that could be quite powerful as an automated AI-based, sort of, you make a marketing page and the content just changes randomly at points, and then the AI gradually figures out what the correct copy is for selling your product is. Yeah, I could imagine that being a tool that would be pretty powerful. Cool, well, I think unless there's any more questions, I think that's great. And yeah, look forward from hearing you, especially people who want to try and build things with AI, and looking forward to seeing you on Slack. Thank you.